History is full of twists and turns. But what if there's more to the story? I'm James Mackay, and on History Unfiltered, we dig deep into the moments that change the world, but often don't get told as they should. History is often told from a single perspective, but what if there's more to the story? Welcome to History Unfiltered, Episode 2, The Lost Kingdoms of Africa and Their Forgotten Civilisations. Hello, and welcome to History Unfiltered, the podcast where we dig deeper into the untold stories of the past, question the mainstream narratives, and hopefully have a little bit of fun along the way. I'm James Mackay, and today we're embarking on a journey through Africa's rich history, specifically the lost kingdoms and empires that played a huge role in shaping the continent's legacy, but often go unrecognised in popular history. Now, before you start picturing ancient Egypt or the well-known kingdoms of Mali and Zimbabwe, we're going to dive a little bit deeper today. We're talking about the kingdom of Axiom, the Mali Empire, and Great Zimbabwe, and of course others who have influenced global trade, culture and politics, but have long faded from mainstream historical narratives. Are you ready for a journey through time and forgotten civilizations? Then stay tuned. Quite excited to dive into this topic. Africa's history is incredibly rich and diverse, but too often we only hear about the highlights while the complexities of these great kingdoms get overlooked. So let's uncover some of these stories now. Let's take a moment just to think about how we've traditionally learned about history. Too often we're presented with a narrow view of the world, one that highlights certain civilizations while leaving out entire regions and peoples. African history in particular has often been overshadowed by colonial narratives or completely overlooked. And yet Africa has always been a continent rich in culture, innovation and powerful empires. It's easy to get caught up in the stories we're taught in school, but when you take a closer look at history, you start to see how much of the past is either forgotten or just completely misrepresented. For example, how many people know about the Kingdom of Aksum, or the sprawling Mali Empire? These were civilizations that shaped trade routes, created monumental structures, and influenced cultures around the globe, but their stories rarely make it into the textbooks. And I guess what's fascinating is that these empires didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They had long-lasting effects on the cultures around them, connecting vast parts of the world through trade, technology, and intellectual exchange. They were integral to global history, but too often don't get the recognition they deserve. Let's start with the Kingdom of Aksum, which rose to power in what is now Ethiopia. It is one of the great trading empires of the ancient world, with an influence stretching across Africa, the Middle East, and even parts of Asia. Aksum controlled vast trade routes, dealing in ivory, gold, and frankincense, and it was one of the first major civilizations to adopt Christianity, yet outside of Ethiopia, most people barely know it existed. And this is exactly the kind of history that I find fascinating, and hopefully you do too. The Kingdom of Aksum existed from about the 1st century AD until around the 10th century, and during that time it was one of the most powerful empires in the world. It had impressive architecture, including the famous obelisks and a written script called Ge'ez that's still used in Ethiopia today. And what is even more remarkable is that Aksum's influence extended to the Red Sea and the Arabian Peninsula. It was a true crossroads of civilizations. Imagine being in Aksum, trading with merchants from Rome, India, and even China. It's a forgotten empire with such a vast reach, and yet it doesn't get the attention it deserves. In the Middle Ages, Aksum was known as the greatest market of northeastern Africa. Literally everyone traded there from across the world. Speaking of empires with far-reaching influence, let's move on to the Mali Empire. When you think of Africa's ancient empires, Mali should be at the top of the list. At its peak in the 14th century, the Mali Empire controlled large parts of West Africa and had one of the richest rulers in history, a chap called Mansa Musa. His pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 made him famous, and he distributed so much gold that it reportedly affected global economies at the time. It's difficult to comprehend just how rich Mansa Musa was, but he'd certainly make Elon Musk look like a pauper. With Mansa Musa at the helm, Mali was a powerhouse in both trade and education. The city of Timbuktu, one of its capitals, was a major intellectual centre with some of the greatest libraries and universities in the world. Yet today, so many people have little idea about this empire, its wealth, or its contributions to the development of knowledge. And whilst Mansa Musa was definitely a legend worth telling, and his journey still sparks curiosity to this day, there's a lot more to the story of Mali than just his riches. It wasn't just about wealth. The highly organised society had a complex legal system and rich cultural traditions. They had scholars, scientists, and architects who built remarkable structures, and they advanced knowledge in mathematics and astronomy. And then we move on to Great Zimbabwe, which was a civilization that flourished between the 11th and 15th centuries in what is now modern-day Zimbabwe. The kingdom was known for its incredible stone architecture, including the famous Great Enclosure, an architectural marvel made entirely of stone without mortar. It was one of the largest pre-colonial civilizations in sub-Saharan Africa. Not only that, the Great Zimbabweans were so advanced in their agriculture, mining and trade. They even controlled the gold trade and built vast trade networks within the Swahili coast, China and even India. But despite its monumental ruins, many people still don't realise that this civilization existed. There's often a misconception in the Western world that Africans could have built such advanced structures. Great Zimbabwe's ruins are evidence of a highly sophisticated society with both deep cultural and technological knowledge. The idea that they were somehow lost or abandoned is just wrong. This civilization had a rich history with a complex social and political structure that left a lasting legacy in the region. And I suppose that's the beauty of exploring these kind of lost kingdoms. They challenge the assumptions that many people have in the Western world about African history. These civilizations were powerful, innovative, and integral to shaping the world as we know it today, and yet they've often been overshadowed or ignored by mainstream history. Whilst we're only really scratching the surface, it's worth mentioning the Kingdom of Kush, which rivaled ancient Egypt. Shifting our focus onto the Kingdom of Kush, which is one of the most fascinating yet often overlooked civilizations in African history of that period. Kush was located to the south of Egypt, in what is now modern-day Sudan, and was a powerful kingdom that not only rivaled the ancient Egyptians, but at its peak actually ruled over it. The Kingdom of Kush's history dates back to around 2000 BC, and it thrived for centuries. It's remarkable because Kush was known for its advanced civilization, rich culture, military and architectural achievements. One of the most fascinating aspects of Kush is how closely it interacted with Egypt. In fact, the Kushites were not just influenced by Egyptian culture, they shaped it too. The relationship between Egypt and Kush was incredibly complex. Whilst Egypt was the dominant power for much of ancient history, Kush was always there, either as a powerful ally or a fierce rival. During the 25th dynasty, a period known as the Kushite dynasty, the Kingdom of Kush actually conquered Egypt. This led to the famous reign of Pharaoh Pi, a Kushite king who ruled over Egypt and established a dynasty that lasted for nearly a century. The Kushite kings, known as the Black Pharaohs, were not just rulers, they were cultural and military leaders who brought a renewed sense of power to Egypt after a period of instability. It's incredible to think that the rulers of one of Africa's most ancient and powerful kingdoms were of Kushite descent. In fact, the legacy of the Kushites in Egypt is still visible today. The Kushite rulers revitalized Egypt's great temples, restored old monuments, and made significant contributions to Egypt's religious and architectural culture. They also left behind a rich material culture, beautiful art, pottery, and jewellery, which still fascinates archaeologists today. I guess what's particularly striking about the Kingdom of Kush is its unique contributions to architecture and their burial practices within Egypt. Of course, Egypt is famous for its pyramids, but the Kushites developed their own distinctive pyramids, albeit smaller and located in places like Meroe. The Meroe pyramids are scattered across the landscape, and they were used as royal tombs. In fact, the Kingdom of Kush had one of the largest pyramid fields in the world, rivaling the Egyptian pyramids in both scale and complexity. And I guess it's often also overlooked that the Kingdom of Kush had its own distinct culture that was quite different from Egypt. For example, the Kushites were known for their use of iron, which they mastered before other civilizations had. They had an advanced iron smelting industry, and this helped them build strong, efficient armies and also contributed to their wealth through trade. Kush is quite often seen through the lens of its connection to Egypt, yet its own identity as a civilization is incredibly important. For instance, the Kushites had a vibrant and sophisticated society with a strong tradition of art and writing. Their script, known as Meroitic, remains one of the great mysteries of ancient history. And despite the many inscriptions that survive, scholars still fully haven't deciphered the language, which adds an air of mystery to their legacy. The Meroitic script, along with the rich artifacts found in Kushite tombs, shows that Kush was not just an Egyptian outpost, it was a thriving civilization in its own right. And when you look at the art and architecture of the Kushites, you can see a unique blend of African, Egyptian, and even South Arabian influences, creating a fascinating fusion of cultures. And let's not forget the Kingdom of Kush's role in the development of African kingship. The Kushites had a powerful tradition of female rulers, most notably Queen Amanirenas, who led her forces in battle against the Roman Empire. She's remembered as a fierce and strategic leader who successfully defended Kushite territory from Roman invasion. Women in Kush had a level of political and military power that was quite unusual for ancient societies. And Queen Amanirenas is just one example of the powerful women in Kushite history. Their kingdom was also known for its strong religious practices. Kush was a dominant force in northeastern Africa for centuries, yet despite all of this, it often remains a footnote in many historical accounts of Africa. And that's why it's so important to bring attention to the Kingdom of Kush. We can't just focus on Egypt and ignore the other powerful kingdoms that shape the continent. Kush, with its rich history and incredible achievements, deserves its place in the global narrative. It's time for the history of Kush to be told alongside Egypt, Greece and Rome. Exploring the Kingdom of Kush not only opens our eyes to a key chapter in African history, but also challenges the limited ways in which history is often presented. The rise, fall, and lasting legacy of the Kingdom of Kush should serve as a reminder that civilizations and empires are not always bound by the geography or the stories that we're taught. But it's not just Kush. You've got other kingdoms, such as the Kingdom of Ghana, known for its wealth in gold, and there's quite a lot more to explore. These kingdoms didn't just exist, they thrived and left behind stories and legacies that still resonate today. I think it's really time we started recognising these lost kingdoms for what they were, truly monumental. Their stories need to be told, not just as footnotes in history, but as chapters that shape the very fabric of African and world history. Hopefully this little podcast will change perceptions in the Western world of African history. Who knows, it may even inspire someone to make a documentary about African history. Well, there you have it. The Lost Kingdoms of Africa, civilizations that shaped the world in ways that are still felt today. From Axum to Mali to Great Zimbabwe. And of course, not forgetting Kush. These empires were powerhouses of trade, culture and knowledge. And I think they deserve their place in the history books. I really do hope this sparks more curiosity to explore these civilizations further for you. Their stories are waiting to be rediscovered. Thank you so much for tuning into History Unfiltered. We'll be back next time with some more untold stories and some hidden truths. Until then, remember, history is never just black and white. It's a story that's still being written. Join us next week on History Unfiltered, available wherever you get your podcasts.